Thank you, Kristen. We are delighted to be here in Durham, North Carolina today, and look forward to a lively discussion after we have introduced our research and our book. Just to remind you all, the Tea Party in its contemporary manifestation burst on the scene very rapidly and amazingly, just weeks after Barack Obama was inaugurated as President of the United States, following an election that itself was rather amazing and historic. On February 19th, 2009, Rick Santelli, a commentator on CNBC, went into what soon became called a rant, denouncing Obama administration policies to help underwater mortgage holders, who he called losers. He invoked the founding fathers to talk about the horror that they would feel, and that all good Americans ought to feel about what was happening to, quote, our country. Within days, conservatives who had been quite dejected following the 2008 election recognized the rhetorical gold in the Santelli rant, the symbolism that it brought to their cause, and began to organize using the internet and also all kinds of face-to-face methods in communities and regions across the country. They were also cheered on in due course by Fox News. Within weeks, they were staging demonstrations in various regions featuring older people dressed up in colonial costumes, carrying handwritten signs denouncing Obama as a socialist or communist or a Nazi. Within months, they were mounting a huge demonstration in Washington, D.C., and set to work organizing what eventually became about 1,000 regularly meeting local groups in states all across the United States. By 2010, the mainstream media started to take more notice because they were affecting the dynamics of Republican primaries, bringing Marco Rubio in Florida, for example, to a victory over the previous establishment candidate, Charlie Crist. They weighed in the Massachusetts special election on the side of Scott Brown, who won a victory that shocked the Democratic Party in my one-party state. And by November 2010, the Tea Party was riding the wave of massive GOP victories at the national level and in the states, and helping to elect much more conservative Republicans. We all know that they've pushed many of those Republicans to refuse compromise with the Obama administration throughout 2011, and to push for big cuts and changes in direction in national policy. And we see Tea Party funders and Tea Party voters weighing in during the course of the 2012 primaries in a way that I'll discuss at the end of our remarks. Having reminded you, though, of that huge phenomenon that changed the focus of national debates and created a lot of new energy on a formerly dejected right, let me just mention how we got involved. Vanessa was doing a term paper for Robert Putnam's social capital class, and noticed that it was on the right that a lot of the protest energy was happening around healthcare reform. I was finishing up a book on the first 2 years of the Obama presidency in 2010, and couldn't help but notice that the agenda had been shifted by a remarkable manifestation that I didn't quite understand. So it was out of curiosity that we teamed up to write first an article and then a book on the Tea Party. What's new about our research is that we threw every conceivable kind of data and every method known to social science at the problem. We analyzed surveys, we looked at media coverage, we tracked votes in the Congress and in the national electorate. We also went out and visited and sat in on Tea Party meetings in New England, Arizona, and Virginia. And we did one-on-one, in-depth interviews with people who really answer somewhat differently when it's not just a poll at dinner time and not just a matter of talking to a reporter at an angry public event. We put all that together and came up with the conclusions that we'll be sharing with you today before I turn it over to Vanessa to talk about the Grassroots Tea Partiers for a while, let me just say that one of the big findings of our book that you should take away with you from this occasion is that although we all talk about the Tea Party, and we will too, it's not one thing. It's not one organization, it's not one coordinated network, it's not entirely top-down or entirely bottom-up. The Tea Party has always gotten its force, its energy, its ability to impact national politics and to remake the Republican Party from the fact that it's an interaction of three forces working sorted together but not entirely. Grassroots protesters and their 1,000 local Tea Party groups are one force. Another force that we identify in the book are right-wing media cheerleaders who played a very important role, particularly in the beginning, in getting the word out and creating a common sense of values and information. Fox News, to be sure, but also right-wing bloggers and right-wing talk radio hosts who are key figures in civic life on the right in every community. And the third force, beyond the grassroots and the media cheerleaders, are ultra-right, free market, professional advocacy, and political funding groups. These were groups that already existed for many years in most cases, but when the grassroots energy broke out, they relabeled parts of themselves, Tea Party Express, or put their spokesman in front of the cameras to present themselves as spokespeople for a grassroots movement. So we see, and they are backed by what we call roving billionaires, very wealthy people who don't feel particularly tied to any particular organization, but channel their money where they think it counts for right-wing causes. So these are the three forces. Their interaction is what makes the Tea Party work in the lead up to the 2010 election, and in a slightly different way in the 2012 election cycle that I'll talk about at the end. But now let me give Vanessa a chance to share some of our fascinating findings about the grassroots.
Thanks, Theda. So I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about who the Grassroots Tea Partiers are and what they believed. And first I just wanted to reiterate something that Theda pointed out, which is that this research was a lot of fun. It was really deeply enjoyable to go out across the country and just talk to Americans about politics, and do so in a way that wasn't mediated by the sort of confrontations that happen at a protest, or the limitations of a television interview, or the limitations of just looking at surveys, right? All of these things can be valuable, but the chance to actually sit down with people was really a great pleasure, I think, for both of us. So who are the Grassroots Tea Partiers? First of all, these are older, white, middle-class conservatives, right? Above all, they're conservative. That was something we found across the board, that even if they hadn't been involved in politics before, and many of them had been quite engaged in either politics or other civic affairs, working for the school board or the library board, that kind of thing. The thing that was clearly the case throughout their lives is that they had been conservative people. Many had, a surprising number of people told us that their first political experience that they remember was in the Goldwater campaign, right? So these are Republicans of long standing. So as older white middle-class people, they tend to be a little bit wealthier and a little bit more educated than the average American. But the thing that I think really strikes you if you go to a Tea Party meeting is that the demographic sort of age of the group, right? Almost without exception, I would be the youngest person in the room. I remember at a meeting I went to in Arizona, I had actually been doing interviews beforehand, and a very lovely couple agreed to drive me over to their meeting that night that they were going to. And so I come in with this couple, and the host of this local tea party takes one look at me and them and says, "You brought a young person," right? And I'm 30, so I had almost stopped thinking of myself that way, so this is actually reassuring for me personally. But anyway, so the groups tend to be sort of near retirement age, at retirement, although the group leaders are sometimes a bit younger. We often saw sort of stay-at-home moms, people who'd been involved in the PTA or in church groups, were sort of the vibrant force that was organizing the meetings and that kind of thing. So this is a lot of demographic similarity. One thing that is a distinction between different parts of the Tea Party are there are more religious members of the Tea Party and there are libertarians. In our experience, most people were socially conservative, and the most central people in the organization were socially